3 minutes to. Oh, there we are. Well, bueno, hola a todos. Hi, everyone. We're here with Isabel Miliar, who is the author of this wonderful book, The Psychoanalysis of Artificial Intelligence, which is a groundbreaking work and mind-blowing text that I had the pleasure to read like a year ago when it came out, and I was actually working on some related topics too, and so it came like at the perfect time. And well, ever since I've been studying it and thinking about it, and it has blown my mind over and over. So I had the pleasure today to be here with her. We were going to talk about the book, about some issues around it, and hopefully by the end of the chat, maybe you can tell us also about what you are working on right now,
Sure.
what comes next. And well, I'm making a little, uh, taking 2 or 3 minutes just to let the people in the room. And also, I have to tell you to the audience that if you want to ask something or if you have any comments, feel free to post them there in the comment area, and we'll try to read them at the end of the talk and maybe have a little interaction with that. Um, so please feel free. We cannot see the comments right here in our screen, but they'll make it get to us. Okay, so I don't know. I'm sorry. I have a kind of a flu, so I'm sorry if I'm like
Oh, no worries. Are you okay? I
rushing
hope
all
you're
the
feeling
time.
okay.
No, I'm fine, but this awful feeling in my throat, so
Well, as
that's
long as
okay.
it's
That's
not
okay. But
coronavirus, I hope.
no,
Good.
I'm hoping it's not, but no, I don't think so. I don't have a fever or anything, so it's just the thing. Okay, so well, welcome, and let's start. Okay, so well, we said we'd do this more like an informal talk, so I'll be asking in that tone. So the first thing I have to say is that mm, I have to say this very personally because until I learned about your book, I thought that I was a crazy person trying to relate psychoanalysis and artificial intelligence. So when I learned about it, and it was on a post on the Facebook wall of I think Ian Parker who posted it, and so I said, "Oh, I gotta get that book." So I ordered it and I started reading it, and it was a relief. I thought like, okay,
Oh, that's
I'm
so
not
good.
that crazy, or at least that makes two of us. So I'd like to know, in your case, what led you to it.
Mhm.
I suppose there's some previous work that you were working on that led you to this possible relation. How was
Yeah.
the process of getting to it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really nice to be here with you, Isai, and thank you for everyone else who's here too. I'm really happy that you had such a, a connection to the book. That's really nice to hear. I mean, yeah, I think that the journey to actually coming to the question, the specific question of the psychoanalysis of artificial intelligence, was a long journey. Of course, the book was my PhD thesis, so in a sense, it kind of started probably bubbling up during my master's, when I started thinking about questions relating broadly to subjectivity and technology and the body and such. So, of course, academically, I have a philosophy background, and then I went into more sort of critical theory, and then I started getting more interested in clinical psychoanalysis and learning more specifically about Lacanian psychoanalysis, and that became really much a focal point in my research when I started my PhD. And I was at first kind of interested in sort of some more sort of biopolitical questions around the management of bodies and the management of life and death and all those sort of biopolitical, necropolitical questions. but I was sort of much more from a Deleuze-Guattarian sort of and a Foucauldian side of things, side of the questions, than a Lacanian side. But as I got more familiar with psychoanalysis, other questions became much more interesting to me, or more pertinent in relation to the kind of buzzword that everybody's talking about a lot, which is artificial intelligence. You know, there's lots of theories about it, there's lots of philosophizing about it, and there's lots of hyperbole about it. But I was kind of more interested in some of the unthought questions and some of the more nuanced questions around the psychoanalytic dimensions to this very strange concept that seems to be something that we all think we understand, but actually perhaps we don't understand so well. Like many, you know, concepts that get thrown around in, for example, in philosophy, you know, we have all these concepts that seem self-evident, but then of course once you start unpacking them, they become much more complicated and difficult. So artificial intelligence, I kind of honed in on it when I really started looking at film. I was interested in looking at film depictions of artificial intelligence and the particular way that sexuality figured in our depictions of embodied AI. So that was the sort of entry point from when I started building out some of the psychoanalytic dimensions to what I was interested in. And then it kind of became something else, because I realized that there was many other philosophical questions around the concept of AI itself that needed to be unpacked in order to start fleshing out this broader sort of question as a thesis, you know, because the thing about a thesis is, of course, it has to have, even though it's a book, it has to have one question that you're trying to follow through the whole way.
Of course. And that's interesting, because I didn't know that you had started with Deleuze and Guattari, which is always in kind of an opposite field, relating, but at the same time opposite to Lacan. So what did you find in Lacan? I think it's important because Lacanians are often accused of messing around with everything, you know, like putting their nose into everything. And so when one starts in Lacan and starts like spreading from there, it sounds like that now, like you are, like people are saying, stay in your field and do your thing. But it's interesting that you started with Deleuze and on Guattari, and then you come to Lacan and you find something there. What is it that you found in Lacan that wasn't present in Deleuze and Guattari?
Well, I think that as many sort of Lacanians will say, a lot of the interesting things that Deleuze and Guattari do come from Lacan anyway, and that it's sort of a misunderstanding on people to think that, you know, they're totally mutually exclusive, when actually, you know, I think you have to do Lacan if you want to do Deleuze properly as well. And obviously there's that sort of eternal battle about the concept of desire in Lacan versus Deleuze, which are very different concepts. But actually, I don't think Deleuze would have for a minute tried to say that Lacan wasn't so essential to his work. But I think of course, like Lacanian psychoanalysis, as far as I'm concerned, is the sort of most rigorous and complex theory of subjectivity there is. And I'm not saying that it's the only one, that there are others, but it's one that allows you to ask questions about the body and language and subjectivity and knowledge and enjoyment and all these other questions that I think are very essential to thinking about such a monolithic question as artificial intelligence. But I think for any questions to do with subjectivity, Lacanian psychoanalysis is so fruitful and allows us to think about the question of language as distinct from the problem of the body, which, you know, I think a lot of people have this misconception about like Lacanian psychoanalysis, is that it's all about language and it doesn't really understand the body very well. Whereas I think that actually it is a theory of the body. It's a theory of the body that lots of other philosophical paradigms maybe don't get so well. And it's one which allows you to think about questions relating to the drives, for example, the drive body in relation to AI, which I think can be very useful. So, there were lots of immediate things that I thought, oh, okay, this hasn't necessarily been used before in relation to AI, and it struck me as strange that they hadn't, to be honest.
Okay, so that leads me to another question that I've been very curious about, which is precisely the body issue. Which I don't know how to make the question. Which status would you say that the body has in the psychoanalytic Lacanian psychoanalytic theory? Because I'm thinking in this horizon where I'm thinking specifically in this debate that you can find like amongst, for example, Adrian Johnston and Slavoj Žižek, which share a lot of background, but then they split precisely in this consideration of biology, which would be in the case of Adrian Johnston, or quantum physics, or whatever that Zizek is trying to develop. But as I understand, the problem of the debate is precisely between some materiality, some form of matter that you can actually find and develop from there, or the pure formalization, logic formalization that you can find in quantum mechanics. That I think it's the line of Zizek. So I think what I'm trying to ask is, what would be your position from the work you did? What would you say that you can feel more comfortable with?
God, that's a difficult question. I mean, Adrian Johnston's work on sort of transcendental materialism is brilliant and fascinating. I don't think that I would probably say I would be somewhere between him and Zizek. Of course, I came to Lacan through Zizek, and then I went towards much more clinical uses of Lacanian psychoanalysis, and then kind of got a slightly different way of thinking about the body in relation to thought, and in relation to being, and in relation to knowledge. And I do have sympathy for the more sort of biological and naturalistic arguments of someone like Adrian Johnston, but I think that I would be much more on the sort of Baudrillardian side of the argument, I guess, which is that the problem with so much knowledge about the body, so much excessive transparency, so much biopolitical information about bodies, actually doesn't really get to the kinds of questions that psychoanalysis is interested in. So that it kind of opens up other problems, but it still doesn't necessarily get to the actual sort of ontological or transcendental issue that might be at stake when you're asking psychoanalytic questions. Because I think essentially what psychoanalytic questions are they're mythical questions that don't have an answer. They're sort of structural questions that can't be found by more information, as it were. So it's a question of angling oneself around the problem, it very much in the vein of somebody like Baudrillard or Lyotard or somebody like that. So that's a sort of quick way of trying to avoid having to engage with Adrian Johnston, because he's very formidable. But yeah, I think that I certainly would have a slightly different approach than that. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm asking this because you give a definition in the introduction of AI that would perfectly fit the definition of the unconscious, and you remarked that. So that got me thinking, and I've talked about that. In which sense do we say that artificial intelligence is artificial? Or if it operates in itself, just as the same way that, for example, the unconscious operates. And so it's not so much that it is an artificial intelligence, but maybe natural intelligence is already artificial. I don't know if I'm being clear with this concern that I have.
Well, I think you're referring to the Manoni quote, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The him sort of telling Octave Manomini to stop being so soft, because don't think that humans are really that different from computers. So we're not so different as you think. And I mean, we could say, well, this is Lacan. This is early Lacan talking about language. This is him talking about, you know, this being sort of superstructuralist, and in that period of the symbolic period, which is, yes, definitely we're linguistic creatures, but we're born into language. I mean, language is a dead structure, like computers are abstract structures that are dead, and we are born into them. So in that sense, there is that machinic element of intelligence that carries on regardless. It's an undead structure that will be still processing information, whether there's a body to inhabit it. So, you know, we could sort of look at the question of abstraction in this way much more broadly, as well. All that intelligence is the beginning of abstraction. It's the moment we start to separate the symbolic from the sign. So from when the written word is able to metaphorize and become other things, and we start the beginning of history, then we're already artificial. We've already denaturalized ourselves in the way that animals don't, because animals follow signs and they can't mediate between those the thing and the sign. So if we look at it like that, then we say, yeah, of course, all intelligence is artificial. But when we get to the problem of the human question, it's the question of course, the body, and how does the body factor into this intelligent, sort of undead, rational system? And, you know, well, the sort of short answer would be to say, well, it's because it's a negative question. It's not a sort of positive question. It's a question of the drive. It's a question of the sort of endless circulation around objects. You know, the idea that intelligence is just this process of algorithmic calculation, of course, is a very limited way of understanding intelligence. Human intelligence is a combination of all kinds of faculties, you know, perception and visual and haptic and sensorial and all these other things that are going on all the time at the same time as the neuronal processes. So this whole problem of how the drives are factored into intelligence, the invocatory, the scopic, you know, these are also questions for that psychoanalysis can answer in a very different way, I think, and sort of flesh out what this problem is when we're trying to understand the discrepancy between the analogy between an artificial version of this so-called prefabricated idea of the human.
Okay, so that makes me wonder, and is one of another question that I want to make, because it struck me a lot how you the methodology of the work, because being a fool like me, I would have thought only on, you know, psychoanalysis and artificial intelligence, but you do something very interesting. You say psychoanalysis of artificial intelligence, and you present it as AI having like a kind of, because you say there can only be a psychoanalysis if there is a demand that meets the desire of the analyst, and then we start from there. But I was very curious, what could you say that is a demand in artificial intelligence that can justify that one can make a psychoanalysis of artificial intelligence?
Well, I mean, of course, it's a provocation, isn't it? I mean, the sort of the whole the title of the book is a provocation because it's asking, it's a sort of ambivalent thing, you know, the psychoanalysis of AI. What does that mean? You know, what's being psychoanalyzed here? So it's already trying to set up the sort of problematic of where is the desire located within this coupling. And you know, first of all, there's sort of various layers to that, obviously, but I suppose first of all, there is the obvious question of, on the one hand, the practice of psychoanalysis, which, you know, as I say, and as you just said, is a question of transference, and is a question of a specific relationship between two people, and that only happens within a clinical setting. That's psychoanalysis proper. And psychoanalytic theory, which is a completely different kettle of fish, which can be applied and morphed into various different things. And of course, this book is something that is aware of that fact and tries to, like so many books in psychoanalysis, in the psychoanalytic field, is trying to sort of grapple with that, the how to use psychoanalysis, but be aware of the fact, well, it's not actually psychoanalysis because we are not dealing with just two people in a room in a transferential relationship. So I think with that kind of self-consciousness about it, I'm interested in thinking about in what ways is our thinking about AI sort of begging unseen psychoanalytic questions. In which ways are our desires or enjoyments invested in AI, in our discourse about it, and in what structural way can we understand AI as a form of enjoyment, as a form of human thinking, and hence, obviously, which is why I started sort of build up to the center of the book to the question of the sexual non-rapport in Lacan, and how thinking about structure in these terms of subjectivity, in terms of structure, how one can start to think about the production and the development of artificial intelligence as also being part and parcel of a process of structural enjoyment. And hence, you know, there is a demand in the fact that artificial intelligence grows from human desire, and it is something that has a history which is born out of various different sorts of scientific paradigms, which also obviously led us to where we are now, but also it's a thing which is born out of fictional histories and narratives about, and fantasies about the future, which haven't necessarily come true yet, but we make them come true through cinema, through literature, etc., etc.
Okay. And I loved that about the book, because in a way it gives you what it promises, because you say this from the beginning, that it's a provocation, and you're not trying so much to subsume one of the fields of knowledge to another, but just to keep the tension open. And I think that happens in the book. Of course, you draw some lines of argumentation, you sketch some answers, possible answers or possible questions there, but you finish the book and you don't get the feeling of, okay, it's all set, but you get this feeling of, gosh, I need to think about this, you know. What does it mean to put these two things together without expecting one to win over the other or whatever? So I think it's in that sense it actually meets its purpose. It's, for me, it was a very, very shocking experience, in the sense of that it made me think, I have to think about this, I have to keep thinking about this, and there is actually something that can be said in this. I don't know if we could even say relation. I think in this presenting together, you know, these two fields and seeing what happens, I think there's a lot of things to say there. So I understand it in this trail that you make. The figure of the sex robot is a way to link these two fields, and
Yeah.
present there also the problem of the body, and what would be the incarnation of this artificial intelligence and what that provokes in the human thought. So I'd like you to tell something about that, about this figure of the sex bot.
Sex bot, yeah. So it's to me, it was like a very kind of nice illustrative way of bringing together, as you say, the two fields without trying to come up with a definitive answer, but opening up other imaginative and conceptual pathways. But also it gave me a specific object that I could develop conceptually and theoretically, and to answer in a kind of systematic way my questions, and sort of unpack quite carefully some of the sort of more clinical questions, but also the more philosophical questions about AI. So, I mean, of course, I have the figure of the sex bot that appears in each of the chapters in the second half of the book, in order to stand in for all the different Kantian questions, which are the Kantian Enlightenment questions. What can I know? What should I do? What may I hope for? And then lastly, what is man? And so they do two things. On one hand, they answer these questions. On the other hand, they try to do different iterations of the relationship between AI and the human. So the first iteration is the sort of exterior relationship, i.e. the question of the artificial intelligent body outside the human body, which we see in the film Ex Machina. And then the second version is the idea of the artificially intelligent body that's had a human brain put inside it. And then the third version is the idea of the artificial intelligent body that then gives birth to another body in Blade Runner. So it's a sort of like a moving through of the human body with the AI. And so the reason I use the Kantian questions is sort of because these were the questions that I found in television, in the interview television that Jacques-Alain Miller asks Lacan to answer. And he famously says, well, no, I'm not going to answer the Kantian questions because, that's a question of philosophy, and I'm a psychoanalyst and I don't answer philosophical questions. I position the subject so that they may answer the questions themselves. So in a sense, what I'm trying to do by sort of framing these questions philosophically, traditionally in this sort of Kantian way, but yet not really answering them, is to say, well, yeah, but this is not really a question for a philosophical answer, it's for a psychoanalytic subversion. So it's trying to unpick and sort of turn the questions inside out through the medium of film.
And that's very interesting. We have here in our local university, Querétaro's University, along with some colleagues, we have a program that comes out each year, Psychoanalysis and Cinema. And so that I'd like to ask you, because again, there has been a lot of critics to psychoanalysis, like, why do you take cinema and you try to psychoanalyze movies and stuff like that? But we find still something very valuable in cinema, that it's not only a field of application or something like that of psychoanalysis, but to generate these tensions that could be productive. But what is your perception of cinema in relation to psychoanalysis and thought in general?
Yeah, well, I think that it's sort of so vital to be able to use fictional narratives to understand psychoanalytic questions. First of all, because it allows us to project and imagine fantastical scenarios that we don't get to think about in real life. So, i.e., conceptual questions, for example, in the sci-fi films that I use, but also for psychoanalysis, film is such a important conceptual toolbox for understanding the body as a sort of machine as well, and to be able to move around our ideas of what the human body is, and play with the question of the gaze, and the question of what is inside and what is outside, and what we can see and what we can't see, and all of these sort of psychoanalytic questions that people maybe think aren't, but when they think of psychoanalysis, they think, oh well, psychoanalysis in film is a question of analyzing characters' feelings, or analyzing relationships, or analyzing sort of very Oedipal tropes. But actually there is so much that psychoanalysis can do with film, and of course Zizek is a person who's done so much for that, but also Todd McGowan and the way that he thinks about the gaze in film, and that obviously thanks to Joan Kopiec and what she kind of inaugurated with her reading of psychoanalysis and film. There's so many important theorists thinking about film in this way as much more sort of like a philosophical kind of playground, really, as opposed to just a way of understanding human relationships.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting, and I think it's a way to posit cinema in a different way, that because I think the critics sometimes are very right, like a lot of the psychoanalytic developments over cinema in a time, at least, they were like trying to psychoanalyze, or where do you find the Oedipus complex, or whatever, like a field of application or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that to sustain that tension, to a little like you do in the book, just put the two fields together and see what happens in those tensions. I believe that is a very good way of using it, but also see the reflection of psychoanalysis and cinema, and also to produce something out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think with a sort of typical criticism of psychoanalysis is that it can become conservative, or it can become reified, or stuck in old-fashioned ideas, and which is a constant criticism of Lacanian psychoanalysis, which is valid, but also it's a criticism that's sometimes unfounded, because I think as we all know, that Lacanian psychoanalysis is often accused of things that it's unfairly accused of things that it doesn't do. But also, that doesn't mean to say that there are not lots of people in Lacanian psychoanalysis who are conservative, who do have sort of unmalleable ideas of what you should be able to do with Lacanian psychoanalysis, or psychoanalysis in general. But yeah, I think that's just always a problem, a sort of institutional problem, but also a theoretical problem.
Sure. Okay, so sorry for this detour to cinema. So coming back to the sex part, if only I end asking, can it enjoy? And that's a very interesting question, because it also moves the question from philosophy to psychoanalysis proper. And when I first read it, I thought, what does that question mean in itself? I don't know if I'm being clear. What do you mean when you say, does it enjoy? Of course, you are using all the conceptual apparatus of psychoanalysis, but I guess my question is, how can we think enjoyment in AI?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think with the book, it opened up as much questions for me as I hope it did for other people as well, because I didn't set off to have an answer, because the idea that I would be able to answer that question would be ludicrous. I couldn't, but I just wanted to sort of open up different questions for myself and for other people, in terms of trying to think about the different images of AI that we have at the moment, that often get sort of all lumped together and thought of as this one thing, when actually artificial intelligence entails many different forms of technology, actual technology that do exist, which spans everything from sort of abstract algorithmic computational things to neurobiological simulations and silicon engineering and stuff that invokes very different problems, philosophical problems in relation to the problem of AI. So along that huge trajectory, there's many different ideas there, but also then as obviously the book is very much concerned with speculative ideas of AI and our fantasies about the possibility of a embodied, fully functional, Blade Runner-esque AI, and which is why I kind of obviously work through the book up towards the idea of the AI as being able to reproduce, and the problem of reproduction, the problem of what happens when you start to think about a being that doesn't have a history, or doesn't have the problem of parents, doesn't have the problem of mummy and daddy. So, all of the kind of traditional criticisms of psychoanalysis as the sort of Deleuze-Guattarian anti-Oedipal questions are really sort of starkly put to you in reality when you have to think about the idea of, well, never mind anti-Oedipus, if there is no parents, if there is no history, what kind of being is that? What kind of problem of subjectivity do we have here? And of course, I have talk about Blade Runner and the problem of the masculine figure of K in the film, and him sort of searching through various different female figures in order to find out whether he was born or whether he had a mother, and that kind of brings up questions of course, sexuality and structure and femininity and jouissance and masculinity and what those things mean. And then the sort of the last point in the book is about the question of the child, which is sort of exemplified by the little boy from that film, that sort of Steven Spielberg film, AI it's called, and it's about an AI child. And I found that interesting as a idea to sort of sum up very much the fantasy we have of AI as, on the one hand, this big scary beast that we don't understand. Hence, the beginning of the book starts with the Oedipal beast of the Rocco's basilisk, and finishes with the very gentle figure of the vulnerable child who is our creation. We've made this thing. We are responsible for it. And what can it do? And what can it learn? And what does it want? And this idea of the possibility of something that we've made, but then becomes its own person, I think is kind of part of the whole fascination with our sort of theological hubristic idea of creating something that can itself go off and be a person. So of course we come back to very like Oedipal problems of him looking for his mum, and wanting to find his dead mother, and when he finds the mother, well, that's it, then he can sleep, then he can die, then he's human and he's dead, and then you're not an AI anymore. So I suppose it's this kind of, I was really interested in trying to think about what humans are trying to do when they're fantasizing about creating these beings that have nothing to do with us.
You know what my assumption is? That we kind of suspect that we are not so different. That's my by the moment answer now, because that is exactly what got me wondering. I'll see if I can say it right. Because okay, the AI whatever didn't have a mother and father and all that, but nonetheless it is created in all this web of signifiers, of desires operate, or expectations, whatever. So maybe it doesn't need a mother and a father, because I think, and I would like to know what you think about this question, because I would shift a little that question of can it enjoy, and I personally would ask, can it be enjoyed by the other, and what would the effects of that be in that, of course, hypothetical AI, in the sense of, because desire enjoyment comes from the other, at first. So my question, I guess, is it necessarily that it has a history of its own, like thinking of an individual thing that develops in the world, or that history is already supplemented by the signifier web that surrounds it, and so it can take a place in it?
Mm-hmm.
And assuming that it is very intelligent, it can develop something of its own in that web. I don't know if I'm being clear with my question.
I mean, if I understand you correctly, I think that the problem of whether, if we're really imagining the idea of enjoyment of the AI, I mean, I think we already do that. I think that's just that's what enjoyment is anyway. It's an enjoyment of an object, and in a sense, I think that's why we have to always come back to the sexual non-rapport, because it's a model of understanding incompatible forms of enjoyment, in the sense that one's enjoyment is never commensurate with what we think is being enjoyed on the other side of it. So no matter how your fantasy is structured, it's only ever your fantasy, and it's never going to be the same fantasy as the thing that you're fantasizing about. So in that sense, I think that, lots of the sort of ideas around AI are kind of founded upon a fallacy, which is that, how do we tell the difference between humans and AI when they're exactly the same? Well, then if they're exactly the same, then they're exactly the same. There's no problem. But of course, we're not at that stage, and we're not even talking about that. We're talking about more about what are the problems that human beings create for themselves in this this fantasy of the creation of other forms of life, and what have they not seen about those problems, that actually you don't even need to worry about AI before you see that human beings are not very good at seeing where the blind spot lies. So I suppose it's all about blind spots. It's all about what the obscured part of knowledge is, that we miss when we're imagining what the other person is thinking. This obscure entity. Human beings are confusing anyway. You don't need AIs.
Yeah, of course. And there's also in this blind spot always the possibility of that something can appear out of it that we didn't expect. And I think that is a very at the same time frightening, and at the same time like very, I don't know which word I could use, like maybe even I'd say happy expectation that something could happen there that would lead us to a very different questions, very different answers, very different conceptions even of what a human being is, and our relations to the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of things. Okay. So I'm looking at the time here. Okay, so I guess we have time for another question. Well, this just occurred to me, but because I have two cats and they're running around here, do you think there is a relation? Because there's this phenomenon right now going on in which we take animals like pets, like cats and dogs, like they were our children, But do you think there is a relation between how we conceive nowadays pets, or I don't know if I can say pet anymore, because there's this, I'll show you. This one is Lola.
Oh, hello. So sweet.
So, but we kind of attribute them some of the human characteristics, and there's of course a big debate around it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think is there a relation between these beings, although they are natural, but they are not fully human, but we try to incorporate in our humanity, and the way we are thinking about AI as something that could also be incorporated as something human? And I'm sorry, this just occurred to me because of the cat, but I'd like to
Yeah.
see if you have something to say.
I mean, yeah, I suppose what sort of the sort of question of stewardship, you mean, like of us being able to nurture nurture this sort of entity that would be kind of under our control. Is that what you mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's that's we love pets because they're sort of, we nurture them and love them, but at the same time they have their own life that we can't partake of. But ultimately we're the boss, so there is, it's a very sort of paternalistic relationship. And I think that, yeah, we definitely have that fantasy about artificial intelligence as well, but we also have the fantasies of it being malevolent and evil and able to kill us or overtake us
Well, I
or go
think that
beyond us.
sometimes I also think that about my cats. I'm pretty sure they
Exactly.
will take one day will
They would.
kill me.
Exactly. I mean, the thing is that humans should be scared of anything they create, because if they create it in their own image, it's probably going to be horrible. That's the thing. And I think that's a question a lot of people have asked me about. Do I think we should be scared of AI? And I think, well, I think that we should be scared of humans because humans
Right.
are already, dangerous and unpredictable, and they don't understand themselves. Humans don't understand themselves. That's why they do so many terrible things. So hence why psychoanalysis is there to help us to realize that we don't understand ourselves fundamentally, and we never will. All we can ever do is to try and be a little bit less ignorant about the ways in which we don't understand ourselves, or the sorts of knowledges that we can't have. So yeah, I mean, I think that wanting to get AI under our control will always happen, but at the same time, if AI really does carry on in exponential ways, there are going to be things that we can't control, but they already are here. We already have so many forms of AI that are malevolent and dangerous because they're harnessed by malevolent and dangerous humans.
Yeah.
So I think that we should be scared. We should already be scared.
I completely agree with that. So, okay, it's been a year since you released the book, and I know you've been in a lot of interviews. Many people asking, I'm sorry, the same questions that I'm asking you now.
Okay.
But with this distance in time, looking back, what does it make you think? What relation do you have now with the book?
Well, just I'm totally surprised, to be honest, because when I was writing the book, obviously it was my PhD, and I was just really just desperately wanted to finish and didn't even care about it anymore. I just didn't want to think about it, and I was worried if I would even get my PhD. So I didn't know that it would be enough for me just to pass my vibe. I was happy with that. So the fact that I passed it and then I was able to publish the book and that so many people liked it, I was like, oh, okay. I'm really surprised because I didn't really know what the reception would be, and I didn't know what effect it would have or where it would hit or who would be interested in it, because I know it's like quite a strange combination of things. So I suppose now I'm just still like surprised and happy that lots of people have connected with it from different theoretical and conceptual backgrounds. And I think it's really nice that it continues to have a life and it's opening up new avenues. So I'm happy about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great because I think that um, that allowed a lot of us to ask these questions, and after this thoughts that I had a year ago about being the only one who was thinking about this. Of course, one is never the only one thinking about something, but sometimes it's hard to find someone that connects because sometimes we don't express it because of the fear that we
Yeah.
have that the reaction might be. So I think, and I want to thank you a lot for this,
Thank you.
opening this field and setting a background that then allows us to problematize, to ask questions, to at least find some comrades, that we can say, hey, we're having the same kind of
Yeah.
question. So I think it's I would even say that it's a new field that opens up that relates these two fields, and that is I don't know, a great achievement, and I have to tell you
Thank
this
you.
because even though these questions might have been around, I think we didn't have the ground to make them happen. And I think your book has given a lot of us that possibility to
Well, that's amazing.
touch,
Thank you so much.
So I thank you a lot for the book, for the talk. And I have to ask you, what is next? What are you working on right now? Is it still AI, or are you moving to another things?
Um, well, thank you so much for saying that. That's really, really nice to hear. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, I sort of rushed into starting to write another book, and probably too soon, but I'm writing this book at the moment called Patai Politics, which is actually a concept that I came up with in this book, and it's trying to elaborate the question of the government of suffering. So to give a bit more explanation, it's building on the paradigms of biopolitics and necropolitics, i.e. the government of life and the government of death. And I've sort of added this third Aufhebung to the life-death synthesis to come to the question of sex, I suppose. And I think it's because, biopolitical and psychoanalytic theories are always in battling with each other. And especially in the question of artificial intelligence, for example, it's a place where the argument is not very well thought out. So with this book, this idea came up about the question of how do you manage suffering? How do you manage, and of course for psychoanalysis, suffering and enjoyment are sort of interchangeable. How do you manage this very strange form of suffering, which is the human being as a sexual creature that is imbued with all these different ways of suffering through their own enjoyment. So of course, I'm not just talking about explicitly sexual things, but as we know in psychoanalysis, sex is everything. Sex is speech. Sex is everywhere. Sex is discourse. How to think about the ways of managing bodies via this particular way of harnessing enjoyment. So patai politics, patio from the Latin to suffer. So it's a sort of a little study on the concept, and I'm at the moment in the early stages of working out how that goes. But AI does form a part of it, definitely.
But it sounds great, and I hope when it comes out, we'll have a chance to talk about it too, because
Definitely.
it's like what I was saying. You opened up a field with this book, and there's a lot of different lines to follow there. So that is one, and I'll be more than excited to learn about it when it's done.
Thank you.
And you'll leave us a lot of other lines to follow too, and so that's great. So thank you very much. I
Brilliant.
think we're okay. We have to finish now. We have a minute or two to talk to the audience. I hope there are some comments that we might perhaps talk about. Well, we don't have them here, but if Manuel or Giovanna can help us with that. Let me check the WhatsApp. Okay. Well, I guess not. Okay. So thank you very much. I think we can end it here for this moment.
Thank you so much.
I would like to keep on
Thank you so
talking
much. It was so nice to talk to you.
And you are so welcome here in
Definitely.
here in America, and we'll looking forward to hear about this
Thank you.
development. So thank
Fantastic.
you very much. You are very generous to spend your time here with us today. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Do we go back in?